During the 3 winter months of December, January, and February, when the Khan is living in his winter palace, all the nobles within a radius of 60 days' march are obliged to supply him with boars, stags, fallow deer, roes, and bears. Besides, Kublai is a great huntsman himself, and his hunting train is superbly mounted and kept up. He has leopards, lynxes, and fine lions trained to hunt for wild animals, eagles strong enough to chase wolves, foxes, fallow and roe deer, and as Marco Polo says, often to take them too, and his dogs may be counted by thousands. It is about March when the emperor begins his principal hunting in the direction of the sea, and he is accompanied by no less than 10,000 falconers, 500 gerfalcons, and many goshawks, peregrine, and sacred falcons. During the hunting excursion, a portable palace, covered outside with lions' skins and inside with cloth of gold, and carried on 4 elephants harnessed together, accompanies the emperor everywhere, who seems to enjoy all this oriental pomp and display. He goes as far as the camp of Chakarimongu, which is situated on a stream, a tributary of the river Amur, and the tent is set up, which is large enough to hold 10,000 nobles. This is his reception saloon where he gives audiences, and when he wishes to sleep, he goes into a tent, which is hung all round with ermine and sable furs of almost priceless value. The emperor lives thus till about Easter, hunting cranes, swans, hares, stags, roebucks, and sea, and then returns to his capital, Cambaluc. Marco Polo now completes his description of this fine city and enumerates the 12 quarters it contains, in many of which the rich merchants have their palatial houses, for commerce flourishes in this town, and more valuable merchandise is brought to it than to any other in the world. It is the depot and market for the richest productions of India, such as pearls and precious stones, and merchants come from long distances round to purchase them. The Khan has established a mint here for the benefit of trade, and it is an inexhaustible source of revenue to him. The banknotes, sealed with the emperor's seal, are made of a kind of cardboard manufactured from the bark of the mulberry tree. The cardboard thus prepared is cut into various thicknesses according to the value of the money it is supposed to represent. The currency of this money is enforced, none daring to refuse it on pain of death, the emperor using it in all his payments and enforcing its circulation throughout his dominions. Besides this, several times in the year the possessors of precious stones, pearls, gold, or silver are obliged to bring their treasures to the mint and receive in exchange for them these pieces of cardboard, so that, in fact, the emperor becomes the possessor of all the riches in his empire. According to Marco Polo, the system of the imperial government was wonderfully centralized. The kingdom is divided into 34 provinces and is governed by 12 of the greatest barons living in Cambaluc. In the same palace also reside the intendants and secretaries who conduct the business of each province. From this central city, a great number of roads diverge to the various parts of the kingdom, and on these roads are now post houses stationed at intervals of 22 miles, where well-mounted messengers are always ready to carry the emperor's messages. Besides this, at every 3 miles on the road, there is a little hamlet of about 14 houses where the couriers live, who carry messages on foot. These men wear a belt round their waists and have a girdle with bells attached to it that are heard at a long distance. They start at a gallop, quickly accomplishing the 3 miles and giving the message to the courier who is waiting for it at the next hamlet. Thus the emperor receives news from places at long distances from the capital in a comparatively short time. This mode of communication also involved but small expense to Kublai Khan, as the only remuneration he gave these couriers was their exemption from taxation, and as to the horses, they were furnished gratuitously by the provinces. But if the emperor used his power in this manner to lay heavy burdens upon his subjects, he exerted himself actively for their good and was always ready to help them. For instance, when their crops were damaged by hailstorms, he not only remitted all taxes, but gave them corn from his own stores. And when there was any great mortality, the flocks and herds in any particular province, he always replaced them at his own expense. He was careful to have a large quantity of wheat, barley, millet, and rice stored up in years of abundant harvest, so as to keep the price of grain at a uniform rate when the harvest failed. He was particularly careful of the poor who lived in Cambaluc. He had a list made of all the poorest houses in the town, where they were usually short of food, and supplied them liberally with wheat and other grain according to the size of their families, and bread was never refused to any applying at the palace for it. It is computed that at least 30,000 persons avail themselves of this daily throughout the year. His kindness to his poor subjects makes them almost worship him. The whole affairs of the empire are administered with great care, the roads well kept up and planted with fine trees, so that from a distance their direction can easily be traced. There is no want of wood, and in Cathay they work a number of coal pits, which supply abundance of coal. Map of the world according to Marco Polo's ideas. Marco Polo remained a long time at Cambaluc, and his intelligence, spirit, and readiness in adapting himself made him a great favorite with the emperor. He was entrusted with various missions, not only in China, but also to places on the coast of India, Ceylon, the Coromandel and Malabar coasts, and a part of Cochin China near Cambodia. And between the years 1277 and he was made governor of Yangtze and of 27 other towns which were joined with it under the same government. Thanks to the missions on which he was sent, he traveled over an immense extent of country and gained a great amount of ethnological and geographical knowledge. We can now follow him map in hand through some of these journeys, which were of the greatest service to science. Chapter 3. Marco Polo. Sochu Tianfu Pinyangfu, the Yellow River Signanfu, Shutichuan Qingtufu Thibet, Likiangfu Karajan Yangti Changmin Bengal Annam, Taiping Sintingui, Sindafu Tichut Sinanfu Linsinchu Linsing, Mangi Yangtichufu towns on the coast, Quinsay or Hangtichufu Fokin. When Marco Polo had been at Cambaluc some time, he was sent on a mission that kept him absent from the capital for 4 months. 10 miles southwards from Cambaluc, he crossed the fine river Pihonor, which he calls the Pulisanghe, by a stone bridge of 24 arches and feet in length, which was then without parallel in the world. 30 miles further on he came to the town of Tsochu, where a large trade in sandalwood is carried on. At 10 days' journey from hence, he came to the modern town of Tianfu, which was once the seat of an independent government. All the province of Shanxi seemed rich in vines and mulberry trees. The principal industry in the towns was the making of armor for the emperor's use. A fine bridge of stone built on 24 arches. A fine bridge of stone built on 24 arches. 7 days' journey further on they came to the beautiful commercial city of Pianfu, now called Pinyangfu, where the manufacture of silk was carried on. He soon afterwards came to the banks of the Yellow River, which he calls Karamoran or Black River, probably on account of its waters being darkened by the aquatic plants growing in them. At 2 days' journey from hence, he came to the town of Kashianfu, whose position is not now clearly defined. He found nothing remarkable in this town, and leaving it, he rode across a beautiful country, covered with towns, country houses, and gardens, and abounding in game. In 8 days he reached the fine city of Quanjianfu, the ancient capital of the Tang dynasty, now called Signanfu, and the capital of Shenxi. Here reigned Prince Mangalai, the emperor's son, an upright and amiable prince, much loved by his people. He lived in a magnificent palace outside the town, built in the midst of a park, of which the battlemented wall cannot have been less than 5 miles in circumference. From Signanfu, the traveler went towards Thibet, across the modern province of Shutichuan, a mountainous country intersected by deep valleys, where lions, bears, lynxes, and sea abounded, and after 28 days' march he found himself on the borders of the great plain of Akmilik Mangi. This is a fertile country and produces all kinds of vegetation. Ginger is especially cultivated. There is sufficient to supply all the province of Cathay, and so fertile is the soil that, according to a French traveler, M.E. Simon, an acre is now worth 15,000 francs, or 3 francs the meter. In the 13th century, this plain was covered with towns and country houses, and the inhabitants lived upon the fruits of the ground and the produce of their flocks and herds, while the large quantity of game furnished hunters with abundant occupation. Marco Polo next visited the town of Sindafu, now Tiqingtufu, the capital of the province of Sichuan, whose population at the present day exceeds 1,500,000 souls. Sindafu, measuring at that time 20 miles round, was divided into 3 parts, each surrounded with its own wall, and each part had a king of its own before Kublai Khan took possession of the town. The great river Kiang ran through the town. It contained large quantities of fish, and from its size resembled a sea more than a river. Its waters were covered by a vast number of vessels. 5 days after leaving this busy, thriving town, Marco Polo reached the province of Thibet, which he says is very desolate, for it has been destroyed by the war. Thibet abounds in lions, bears, and other savage animals, from which the travelers would have much difficulty in defending themselves had it not been for the quantity of large thick canes that grow there, which are probably bamboos. He says, the merchants and travelers passing through these countries at night collect a quantity of these canes and make a large fire of them, for when they are burning they make such a noise and crackle so much that the lions, bears, and other wild beasts take flight to a distance and would not approach these fires on any account. Thus both men, horses, and camels are safe. In another way, too, protection is afforded by throwing a number of these canes on a wood fire, and when they become heated and split, and the sap hisses, the sound is heard at least 10 miles off. When anyone is not accustomed to this noise, it is so terrifying that even the horses will break away from their cords and tethers, so their owners often bandage their eyes and tie their feet together to prevent their running away. This method of burning canes is still used in countries where the bamboo grows, and indeed the noise may be compared to the loudest explosion of fireworks. According to Marco Polo, Thibet is a very large province, having its own language, and its inhabitants, who are idolaters, are a race of bold thieves. A large river, the Kinchakyang, flows over auriferous sands through the province. A quantity of coral is found in it, which is much used for idols and for the adornment of the women. Thibet was at this time under the dominion of the Great Khan. The traveler took a westerly direction when he left Sindafu, and crossing the kingdom of Gaindu, he must have come to Likyangfu, the capital of the country that is now called Saimong. In this province, he visited a beautiful lake which produces pearl oysters. The fishing is the emperor's property. He also found great quantities of cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and other spices under cultivation. After leaving the province of Gaindu and crossing a large river, probably the Irrawaddy, Marco Polo took a southeasterly course to the province of Karajan, which probably forms the northwestern part of Yunnan. According to his account, all the inhabitants of this province, who are mostly great riders, live on the raw flesh of fowls, sheep, buffaloes, and oxen, the rich seasoning their raw meat with garlic sauce and good spices. This country is infested with great adders and serpents, hideous to look upon. These reptiles, probably alligators, were 10 feet long, had 2 legs armed with claws, and with their large heads and great jaws could at one gulp swallow a man. 5 days' journey west of Karajan, Marco Polo took a new route to the south and entered the province of Zardandan, whose capital Notian is the modern town of Yungchang. All the inhabitants of the city had teeth of gold. That is to say, they covered their teeth with little plates of gold, which they removed before eating. The men of this province employed themselves only in hunting, catching birds, and making war, the hard work all devolving upon the women and slaves. These Zardanians have neither idols nor churches, but they each worship their ancestor, the patriarch of the family. Their tradesmen carry their goods about on barrows like the bakers in France. They have no doctors, but only enchanters, who jump, dance, and play musical instruments around the invalid's bed till he either dies or recovers. Marco Polo in the midst of the forests. Marco Polo in the midst of the forests. Leaving these people with gilded teeth, Marco Polo took the great road which conveys all the traffic between India and Indochina, and passed by Bamo, where a market is held 3 times a week, which attracts merchants from the most distant countries. After riding for 15 days through forests filled with elephants, unicorns, and other wild animals, he came to the great city of Meen. That is to say, to that part of Upper Burma, of which the present capital of recent erection is called Amarapura. This city of Meen, which may be, perhaps, the old town of Ava now in ruins, or the old town of Pagan situated on the Irrawaddy, possessed a veritable architectural marvel, in 2 towers, one built of fine stone and entirely covered with a coating of gold about an inch in thickness, and the other, also of stone, coated with silver, both intended to serve as a tomb for the king of Meen. before his kingdom fell under the dominion of the Khan. After visiting this province, the traveler went to Bengala, the Bengal of the present day, which at this time, 1290, did not belong to Kublai Khan. The emperor's forces were then engaged in trying to conquer this fertile country, rich in cotton plants, in sugar canes and sea, and whose magnificent oxen were like elephants in height. From thence, the traveler ventured as far as the city of Kanseig, in the province of the same name, probably the modern town of Kasay. The natives here tattooed their bodies, and with needles drew pictures of lions, dragons, and birds on their faces, necks, bellies, hands, legs, and bodies, and he who had the greatest number of these pictures they considered the most beautiful of human beings. Kanseig was the most southerly point visited by Marco Polo during this journey. Leaving this city, he went towards the northeast, and by the country of Amu, Annam, and Tonkin, he reached Talaman, now called Taiping, after 15 days' march. There he found that fine race of men, of dark color, who have crowned their mountains with strong castles, and whose ordinary food is the flesh of animals, milk, rice, and spices. On leaving Talaman, he followed the course of a river for 12 days, and found numerous towns on its banks. Here, as M. Charton truly observes, the traveler is leaving the country known as India beyond the Ganges and returning towards China. In fact, Marco Polo, after leaving Talaman, visited the province of Gigwi with its capital of the same name, and what struck him most in this country, and we cannot but think that the bold explorer was also a keen hunter, was the great number of lions that were to be seen about its mountains and plains. Only commentators are of opinion that the lions he speaks of must have been tigers, for no lions are found in China, but we will give his own words. He says, "There are so many lions in this country that it is not safe to sleep out of doors for fear of being devoured. And when you are on the river and stop for the night, you must be careful to anchor far from land, for otherwise the lions come to the vessel, seize upon a man, and devour him. The inhabitants of this part of the country are well aware of this, and so take measures to guard against it. These lions are very large and very dangerous, but there are dogs in this country brave enough to attack these lions. It requires 2 dogs and a man to overcome each lion." From this province, Marco Polo returned to Sindafu, the capital of the province of Sichuan, whence he had started on his excursion into Thibet, and retracing the route by which he had set out, he returned to Kublai Khan, after having brought his mission to Indochina to a satisfactory termination. It was probably at this time that the traveler was first entrusted by the emperor with another mission to the southeast of China. M. Pothier, in his fine work upon the Venetian traveler, speaks of this southeasterly part of China as the richest and most flourishing quarter of this vast empire, and that also about which, since the 16th century, Europeans have had the most information. As we return to the route that M. Pothier has traced on his map, we find that Marco Polo went southwards to Siangli, probably the town of Taichu, and at 6 days' journey from thence he came to Kandinfu, the present city of Tainan, the capital of the province of Shantung, the birthplace of Confucius. It was at that time a fine town and much frequented by silk merchants, and its beautiful gardens produced abundance of excellent fruit. 3 days' march from hence, the traveler came to the town of Linsing, standing at the mouth of the Yuho Canal, the principal rendezvous for the innumerable boats that carry so much merchandise to the provinces of Mangi and Cathay. 8 days afterwards he passed by Ligui, which seems to correspond to the modern town of Linsin, and the town of Paisu, the first city in the province of Tichangsu. Then by the town of Singui, he arrived at Karamoran, the Yellow River, which he had crossed higher up when he was on his way to Indochina. Here Marco Polo was not more than a league from the mouth of this great river. After crossing it, he was in the province of Mangi, a territory included in the empire of the Soongs. Before this province of Mangi belonged to Kublai Khan, it was governed by a very pacific king who shunned war and was very merciful to all his subjects. Marco Polo describes him so well that we will quote his own words. "This last emperor of the Soong dynasty was most generous, and I will cite but 2 noble traits to show this. Every year he had nearly 20,000 infants brought up at the royal charge, for it was the custom in these provinces, when a poor woman could not bring up a child herself, to cast it away as soon as it was born, to die. The king had all these children taken care of, and a record kept of the sign and the planet under which each was born, and then they were sent to different places to be brought up, for there are a quantity of nurses. When a rich man had no sons, he came to the king and asked of him some of his wards, who were immediately given to him. As the children grew up, they intermarried, and the king gave them sufficient incomes to live upon. When he went through his dominions and saw a small house among several much larger ones, he inquired why this house was smaller than those near it, and if he found it was on account of the poverty of the owner, he immediately had it made as large as the others at his own expense. He was always waited upon by 1,000 pages and 1,000 girls. He kept up such rigorous discipline throughout his kingdom that there was never any crime. At night, houses and shops remained open, and nothing was taken from them, and traveling was as safe by night as by day. Marco Polo came first to the town of Koigengui, now called Hongfu, on the banks of the Yellow River, where the principal industry is the preparation of the salt found in the salt marshes. One day's journey from this town he came to Paoinchen, famous for its cloth of gold, and the town of Keiyu, now Kaoyu, whose inhabitants are clever fishermen and hunters, then to the city of Taichu, where numerous vessels are generally to be found, and at last to the city of Yonghui. This town of Yonghui, of which Marco Polo was the governor for 3 years, is the modern Yangtichu. It is a very populous and busy town, and cannot be less than 2 leagues in circumference. It was from Yonghui that the traveler set out on the various expeditions which enabled him to see so much of the inland and seacoast towns. First, the traveler went westward to Nangin, which must not be confounded with Nankin of the present day. Its modern name is Ngangking, and it stands in the midst of a remarkably fertile province. Further on in the same direction, he came to Saianfu, which is now called Xiangyang, and is built in the northern part of the province of Hupi. This was the last town in the province of Mangi that resisted the dominion of Kublai Khan. He besieged it for 3 years, and he owed his taking it at last to the help of the 3 Polos, who constructed some powerful balusters and crushed the besieged under a perfect hailstorm of stones, some of which weighed as much as 300 pounds. From Saianfu, Marco Polo retraced his steps that he might visit some of the towns on the sea-coast. He visited Cuikiang on the river Kiang, which is very broad here, and upon which 5,000 ships can sail at the same moment. Kaingui, which supplies the emperor's palace with corn. Qingqiang, where are 2 Nestorian Christian churches. Jingguigui, now Tichangtichu, a busy, thriving city. And Singui, now called Suchu, a large town, which, according to the very exaggerated account of the Venetian traveler, has no less than 6,000 bridges. After spending some time at Viugui, probably Hutichiu, and at Siangan, now Kiahing, Marco Polo reached the fine city of Quinsay after 3 days' march. This name means the city of heaven, but it is now called Hangchaofu. It is 6 leagues round. The river Tsintangkiang flows through it, and by its constant windings makes Quinsay almost a second Venice. This ancient capital of the Sungs is almost as populous as Pekin. Its streets are paved with stones and bricks, and if we may credit Marco Polo's statement, it contained 600,000 houses, 4,000 bathing establishments, and 0 stone bridges. In this city dwell the richest merchants in the world with their wives, who are beautiful and angelic creatures. It is the residence of a viceroy, who has besides 140 other cities under his dominion. Here was to be seen also the palace of the Mangi sovereigns, surrounded by beautiful gardens, lakes, and fountains, the palace itself containing more than 1,000 rooms. Kublai Khan draws immense revenues from this town and province, and it is by tens of thousands of pounds we must reckon the income derived from the sugar, salt, spices, and silk, which form the principal productions of this country. At 1 day's journey south from Quinsay, Marco Polo visited Keohing, Viugui or Hutichu, Gengui or Kuitichu, Xiancian or Yotichu Fu, according to M. Charton, and Soni Tichangfu, according to M. Possia and Qugui or Qutichu, the last town in the kingdom of Quinsay. Thence he entered the kingdom of Fugui, whose chief town of the same name is now called Futichu Fu, the capital of the province of Fokien. According to Marco Polo, the inhabitants of this province are a cruel warlike race, never sparing their enemies, of whom, after they have killed them, they drink the blood and eat the flesh. After passing by Quenlefu, now Qinningfu and Ungan, the traveler entered Fugui, probably the modern town of Quentichu, called Canton amongst us, and the chief town of the province, where a large trade in pearls and precious stones was carried on, and in 5 days he reached the port of Zatum, probably the Chinese town of Tsiuantichiu, which was the extreme point reached by him in this exploration of southeastern China. 4. Marco Polo. Japan departure of the 3 Venetians with the emperor's daughter and the Persian ambassadors, Saigon, Java, Condor, Bintang, Sumatra, the Nicobar Islands, Ceylon, the Coromandel Coast, the Malabar Coast, the Sea of Oman, the island of Socotra, Madagascar, Zanzibar, and the coast of Africa, Abyssinia, Yemen, Hadramaut, and Oman, Ormuz, the return to Venice, a feast in the household of Polo, Marco Polo, a Genoese prisoner, death of Marco Polo about 1323. Marco Polo returned to the court of Kublai Khan when he had finished the expedition of which we spoke in the last chapter. He was then entrusted with several other missions, in which he found his knowledge of the Turkish, Chinese, Mongolian, and Manchurian languages of the greatest use. He seems to have taken part in an expedition to the islands in the Indian Ocean, and he brought back a detailed account of this hitherto little-known sea. There is a want of clearness as to dates at this part of his life, which makes it difficult to give a correct narrative of these voyages in their right order. He gives a circumstantial account of the island of Cipango, a name applying to the group of islands which make up Japan, but it does not appear that he actually entered that kingdom. This country was famous for its wealth, and about 1264, some years before Marco Polo arrived at the Tartar court, Kublai Khan had tried to conquer it and sent his fleet there with that purpose. They had taken possession of a citadel and put all its valiant defenders to the edge of the sword, but just at the moment of apparent victory, a storm arose and dispersed all the enemy's fleet, and thus the expedition was useless. Marco Polo gives a long account of this attempt and adds many curious particulars as to Japanese customs. Marco Polo, with his father and uncle, had now been 17 years in the service of Kublai Khan and even longer absent from their own country. They had a great wish to revisit it, but the emperor had become so much attached to them and valued their services so highly that he could not make up his mind to part with them. He tried in every way to shake their resolution, offering them riches and honor if only they would remain with him, but they still held to their plan of returning to Europe. The emperor then absolutely refused to allow them to go, and Marco Polo could find no means of eluding the surveillance of which he was the object, until circumstances arose which quite changed Kublai Khan's resolution. A Mongol prince named Arghun, whose dominions were in Persia, had sent an ambassador to the emperor to ask one of the princesses of the blood royal in marriage. Kublai Khan acceded to his request and sent off his daughter Kagatra to Prince Arghun, attended by a numerous suite, but the countries by which they endeavored to travel were not safe. The caravan was soon stopped by disturbances and rebellions, and after some months was obliged to return to the emperor's palace. The Persian ambassadors had heard Marco Polo spoken of as a clever navigator who had had some experience of the Indian Ocean, and they begged the emperor to confide the Princess Kagatra to his care, that he might conduct her to her future husband, thinking that the voyage by sea would probably be attended by less danger than a land journey. After some demur, Kublai Khan acceded to their request and equipped a fleet of 40 four-masted vessels, provisioning them for 2 years. Some of these were very large, having a crew of 250 men, for this was an important expedition worthy of the opulent Emperor of China. Matteo, Niccolo, and Marco Polo set out with the Chinese princess and the Persian ambassadors, and it was during this voyage, which lasted 18 months, that it seems most probable that Marco Polo visited the islands of Sunda and other islands in the Indian Ocean, as well as Ceylon and the towns on the coast of India. We will follow him in his voyage and give his description of the places that he visited in this hitherto little-known portion of the globe. Kublai Khan equips a fleet. Kublai Khan equips a fleet. It must have been about 1291 or 1292 that the fleet left the port of Zatum under the command of Marco Polo. He steered first for Tichampa, a great country situated at the south of Cochin, China, and which contains the present province of Saigon, belonging to France. This was not a new country to Marco Polo, as he had visited it about 1280 when he was on a mission for the emperor. At this time, Champa was under the dominion of the Grand Khan and paid him an annual tribute in elephants. When Marco Polo visited this country before its conquest by Kublai Khan, he found the reigning king had no less than 326 children, of who were old enough to carry arms. Leaving the peninsula of Cambodia, the fleet went in the direction of Java, the rich island that Kublai Khan had never been able to subjugate, where abundance of pepper, cloves, nutmegs, and sea grew. After putting into port at Condor and Sandio, at the extremity of the peninsula of Cochin China, they reached the island of Pentam Bintang, situated near the eastern entrance of the Straits of Malacca, and the island of Sumatra, called Little Java. This island is so much in the south, he says, that they never see there the polar star, which is true as far as the inhabitants of the southern part are concerned. It is very fertile, aloes growing most luxuriantly, and here wild elephants and rhinoceroses, called by Marco Polo unicorns, are found, and apes, too, in large numbers. The fleet was detained 5 months on these shores by contrary winds, and the traveler made the most of his time in visiting the principal provinces of the island, such as Samara, Dagrian, and Labrin, which boasts a great number of men with tails, evidently apes, and the island of Fandur or Panka, where the sago tree grows, from which a kind of flour is obtained that makes very good bread. At last the wind changed, and enabled the vessels to leave Little Java, and after touching at Nekaran, which must be one of the Nicobar Islands, and at the Andaman group, whose inhabitants are still cannibals, as they were in the time of Marco Polo, the fleet took a southwesterly course and arrived on the coast of Ceylon. This island, says the traveler in his narrative, was once much larger, for according to the map of the world that the pilots of these seas carry, it was once 3,600 miles in circumference, but the north wind blows with such force in these parts that it caused a part of the island to be submerged. This tradition is still held by the inhabitants of Ceylon. Here are collected in abundance rubies, sapphires, topaz, amethysts, and other precious stones, such as garnets, opals, agates, and sardonyx. The king of the country was the possessor at this time of a most splendid ruby as long as the palm of the hand, as thick as a man's arm, and red as fire, which excited the envy of the Grand Khan, who vainly tried to induce its possessor to part with it, offering a whole city in exchange, but that could not tempt the king to let him have the jewel. 60 miles west of Ceylon, the travelers came to Malabar, a great province on the coast of India. This must not be mistaken for Malabar, which is situated on the west coast of the Indian peninsula. This Malabar forms the southern part of the Coromandel coast and is celebrated for its pearl fisheries. Here the magicians are at work, and are said to render the monsters of the deep harmless to the fishermen. They are astrologers whose race is perpetuated even to modern times. Marco Polo gives some interesting details of the customs of the natives. One is that when a king dies, the nobles throw themselves into the fire in his honor. Another strange custom is that of the religious purifications twice every day and their blind faith in astrologers and diviners. He also speaks of the frequency of religious suicides and the sacrifice of widows whom the funeral pile awaits on the death of their husbands. He also notices the skill in physiognomy evinced by the natives. The next resting place of the fleet was Muftali, of which the capital is now called Masulipatam, the chief city of the kingdom of Golconda. This country was well governed by a queen, a widow for 40 years, who desired to remain faithful to the memory of her husband. The country contained many valuable diamond mines, but these were unfortunately among mountains where serpents abounded. The miners had recourse to a strange device when collecting the precious stones to protect themselves from these reptiles, which we may believe or not as we choose. Marco Polo says they take several pieces of meat and throw them among the pointed rocks, where no man can go, and the meat, falling upon the diamonds, they become attached to it. Now among these mountains live a number of white eagles who hunt the serpents, and when they see the meat at the foot of the precipices, they swoop down and carry it away. At the moment the men who have been following the eagles' movements see them alight to eat the meat, they raise fearful cries, the meat is dropped, and the eagles take to flight, and thus the men have no difficulty in taking the diamonds that are attached to the meat. Diamonds are often found on the mountains, mingled with the excrement of the eagles. After visiting the small town of St. Thomas, situated some miles to the south of Madras, where St. Thomas the Apostle is said to be buried, the travelers explored the kingdom of Malabar and especially the province of Lar, from whence spring all the Abrahamites of the world, probably the Brahmins. These men, he says, lived to a great age, owing to their abstinence and sobriety. Some have been known to attain 150 and even 200 years of age. Their diet is principally rice and milk, and they drink a mixture of sulfur and quicksilver. These Abrahamites are clever merchants, superstitious, however, but remarkably sincere and never guilty of theft of any kind. They never kill any living thing, and they worship the ox, which is a sacred animal among them. The fleet now returned to Ceylon, where in 1284 Kublai Khan had sent an ambassador who had brought him back some pretended relics of Adam, and among other things 2 of his molar teeth. For, if we can believe the Saracen traditions, the tomb of our first father must have been on the summit of one of the precipitous mountains, which forms the highest ground in the island. After losing sight of Ceylon, Marco Polo went to Kale, a port that we do not find marked on any of the modern maps, but a place where all the vessels touched coming from Ormuz, Kis, Aden, and the coasts of Arabia. Thence doubling Cape Comorin they came to Coilum, now Quilon, which was a very thriving city in the 13th century. It is there that a great quantity of sandalwood and indigo is found, and merchants come in large numbers from the Levant and from the west to trade in both. The country of Malabar produces a great quantity of rice, and wild animals are found there, such as leopards, which Marco Polo calls black lions, also peacocks of much greater beauty than those of Europe, as well as different kinds of parakeets. The fleet, leaving Coilum and advancing northwards along the Malabar coast, arrived at the shores of the kingdom of Mandalay, which derives its name from a mountain situated on the borders of Kanara and Malabar. Here pepper, ginger, saffron, and other spices abound. To the north of this kingdom extended that country which the Venetian traveller calls Melibar, and which is situated to the north of Malabar proper. The vessels of the Mangalore merchants came here to trade with the natives of this part of India for cargoes of spices, a fine kind of cloth called buckram, and other valuable wares. But their vessels were frequently attacked, and too often pillaged by the pirates who infested these seas, and who were justly regarded as formidable enemies. These pirates principally inhabit the peninsula of Gujarat, now called Gujarat, where the fleet was on its way after calling at Tana, a country where is collected the frankincense, and Canboat, now Cambay, a town where there is a great trade in leather. Visiting Sumanath, a city of the peninsula, whose inhabitants are cruel, ferocious, and idolaters, and Kesmakoran, the modern city of Kej, the capital of Makran, situated on the Indus near the sea, and the last town in India on the northwest, Marco Polo went westward across the Sea of Oman, instead of going to Persia, which was the destination of the princess.